Hey, it's Callum Bose here again. So in the previous video, we made a custom landing page for a Knack app that looks like this. And we did that by using another service called Plasmic, which lets you visually build kind of website pages that are either static or dynamic. And then we embedded that into our Knack app. So if you haven't seen the previous video, there's a link and go and have a look at that. So where we left the last video is that we had made a static page, but all of these values here, like how many clients we have or our team members, were all static. They're just like hard coded into our Plasmic page, manually entered. We can do better than that. In this video, we're going to make it dynamic. So we're going to make the number of clients based on the real number of clients in our Knack database. We're actually going to show the list of team members as well based on values in our database. So let's launch in. So let's start with how to make the number of clients dynamic. So in our database, we have a table called clients. And our client table has a bunch of records in it, 76 of them to be exact. So those are just preloaded into there. So what we want to do is make this get all the number of client records in our database and show it here instead of the word 6,000. So let's go have a look at the Knack developer documentation, so docs.knack.com, and we click through to the API section here, and then we go down to retrieving records, retrieving multiple records, and we're going to use a view-based GET request. So object-based authentication, so object-based GET request, you need to include your API key, but we're not going to do that in Plasmic. It's more secure to do a view-based GET. So this Plasmic is going to be running just like Knack code you write in the Knack JavaScript area. It's going to be running in the user's browser, so it'd be insecure to include the API key. So we need to use view-based authentication, which is okay to run in the user's browser because it doesn't expose all your data. It only exposes the data that you specifically make public. So we're going to leave that open and come back to it. So for a view-based GET request, we need to have a view that we make with showing the data that we want to expose. And we're going to, for simplicity in this video, going to make it public, although it is possible to also make login protected view-based GET requests, but that's for another video. Okay, so on this page here that we already have, we've got the dynamic data for our homepage, and I've actually already added a couple of views which we're going to use as the data source for our API calls. So I have a grid of clients here, and I also have a grid of team members, which we're going to use later. So what we're interested in right now is our grid of clients. Now, a view-based API call, we need to specify the scene and view ID, as well as our application ID. And then we use this API key, but we only use the word Knack, so it's not actually giving access to all the data. It's just a API key that you can use safely in public. And we also need to give a user token if it's login protected, but it's not login protected, so we don't need to worry about it in this case. So let's go gather all the required information. We've got scene and view first. So what view are we getting data from? Okay, so we've got a grid here. We can see already that it's scene 8. And if we click on this grid view, we can see that that's view 9. So scene 8 and view 9. I'm going to write that down and come back to it. Then we can get our application ID here. And I'll write that down and we can refer back to it later as well. Okay, so over in Plasmic, we now need to run that view-based API call to get our client records. So I'm going to go click on something on the left and then find the page data tab on the right. And I'm going to go add a data query. Okay, I'm going to call that get clients from Knack. I'm going to pick an integration, create new. So we don't have Knack on this list of pre-made integrations, so we're going to use generic HTTP instead and configure it ourselves. Call it Knack integration. And I'm going to add 2 headers here based on the documentation. Application ID and the value that I copied earlier. Then API key, which is a non-sensitive API key. And then a base URL, which is the first part of this URL. And confirm. Then confirm again. And now we can configure our specific usage of that integration to get our clients. So we're going to copy the next part of this API call here and paste it into our little interface here. And we're going to use the scene and view that we copied, that we got earlier. So scene 8, view 9. Then we're going to click preview and see if it works. Okay, so we got something back. We got 76 records, and we can actually look into those records as well and see their data. But in our case, all we really care about is that there's 76 clients in the database. So I'm going to save that. Okay, so now this page has this get client from Knack data query, and then it runs. So now we can use the value that we get back from that in our design. So instead of 6,000 here, we're going to use a dynamic value. So once again, we're not going to go too much into how to use Plasmic, just demonstrating the concepts here and showing the possibilities. And you'll pick up a little bit of how to use Plasmic, but all of this is pretty well documented on Plasmic if you want to give this a go yourself. But basically, I've selected a text kind of element on the page, and over on the right hand side here, I can double click here to type a value, or I can use a dynamic value. Okay, so I'm going to use a dynamic value, and I'm going to go and find the query that we made, the data we got back, the response, and the total number of records. So there's 76. And then that means now we're using a dynamic value, we're showing 76 clients from our database. So back in our front end, we don't have to adjust anything in the Knack Builder, but in the front end, if I refresh, we should see now that we can see that value reflected on our landing page. There we go, 76 clients. Now if I go to add a new client, or for simplicity, let's actually just delete one instead. Wait for that to process. Now if I refresh, I should see 75, which I do. So now we've got this value dynamic, which is pretty awesome and not that hard. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is make our list of team members dynamic. Now this one's a little trickier because we actually want to fill in multiple bits of dynamic data. We want a dynamic profile photo, dynamic name, dynamic kind of title, and maybe a dynamic description. But the principle is basically the same. So once again, we've got a data source view in our pages, dynamic data for homepage, and it's publicly accessible. So here's our publicly accessible data. We've got name, position, bio, and photo. And we've got some records in that database. We've got Harry, Hermione, and myself. Okay, so if I click on that view, I can see scene 8 and view 10. So I'm going to note that for later as well, because that's what we're going to, when we make the data query from Plasmic, we're going to need that. Okay, so back in Plasmic, I'm going to go and add another data query. So I'm going to use the pre-existing Knack integration. I'm going to say get team members is what this query is called now. Once again, we're going to use the Knack documentation to know what URL to use, and then we're going to go scene 8 and view 10. Now let's preview and see what we get back. Okay, so this time we get 3 records, and we're actually interested in the contents of these records this time. So inside we have various fields. So my name, my position, my bio, and a URL leading to my profile photo. So I'm going to save that, and now that data should be available within the page. And I'm going to go and modify the cards here to use that. So these cards here are what Plasmic calls a component. So this is actually a building block that you can create on its own in a separate interface and then just pop into the page. So they've got 6 instances of this component that they've called teams on this page. And they've just basically, at the moment, it's just manually copy pasted. And they've just put the same content in all 6 of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete all but the instance but one instant. So I'm just clicking here and pressing delete on my keyboard. Okay, so that leaves us with 1. Now what we want to do is repeat this card 1 per record in our database. That's step 1. And then step 2 is actually filling it with data from our database. So the repetition is pretty easy. So you click on that component here, and I'm going to go repeat element. And I'm going to select what collection I'm repeating on. So get team members, data, response, records. So we've got 3 records, so we should see it repeated 3 times. So that's good. Now I need to configure this so that it actually lets me define what the photo is, what the name, what the position, and what the bio is. To do that, I actually need to go to a separate part of the editor. And once again, this is just a real quick breeze through Plasmic features. They haven't very well documented, but this shows, once again, the concept of how to hook it up to Knack more than anything. It's not meant to be a comprehensive review of actually how to use Plasmic. So up here, I can see any pages that I've defined, as well as any components that are in this design. So the component is called Teams. So I can jump into that component and I can start editing it. And you can see that this is 1 card. So this is the component. And in here right now, we just have it all hard-coded. We have just a name and a position hard-coded, profile photo hard-coded, and this, filler text hard-coded. So what we need to do is convert these hard-coded values into values that we can specify. And I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let's make the name dynamic to start with. So when I click on that name bit of text there, I can see that the content is just set to their hard-coded name. But I have this little thing here where I can use a dynamic value. Okay, so I need to first go to the component data tab, which is data for this entire component. And I can add what's called props. So these are inputs that I can specify each time I use this component to change what it looks like. So I want to say this instance of the component, the name that it should show is Callum Bowes instead of this hard-coded name. So I'm going to add a new prop here, and it's going to be called name. And it's going to be a type of text, and I'm going to set it to a preview value of Callum Bowes preview. Okay, so that doesn't do anything apart from give us a way to input the name when we use this component, but that's a good start. Now, when I go back to the settings of this particular text element, instead of hard coding the name Jocelyn, I can actually click this little lightning bolt here and use a dynamic value. And this prop that I set up before that's called name is available to me now. So I can click save. And now Callum Bowes preview is what shows there. Now, if I change my preview value as if I've initiated it on the page with a different prop value, then that should update. So now it's a dynamic value of the name instead of the hard-coded one. So I'm going to do that same, pause the video and do that same thing for these other 2 text parts of the card here now. Okay, so that's done. So I added to the component, added 2 more props, one called position and one called bio. And I added some preview values in there. Owner as the position and bio preview as the text for bio. And for each of those elements there, I set the content to a dynamic value of the corresponding prop. So that just leaves the image. So that just leaves the image. So I'm going to add another prop for image URL. And that's just going to be text as well. Then I'm going to go over to the settings of the actual image here. I'm actually going to remove the image so I can then specify a dynamic URL for that image. So I'm going to go dynamic value, image URL, and then I'm going to paste in an existing image to test it out. So back where I defined the image URL prop, I'm going to click there and set a preview value of this profile photo that I copied from elsewhere, just an existing URL of the photo basically. And there we have it. So now if I change any of those things, I can change what the component looks like. So we have a component that accepts a dynamic value, but still makes it look like a card. So now let's head back to our home page and see where we get to. Okay, so here's our team member collection that's repeated here. So we have one version of this teams component repeated, and we still have no content inside it. So now let's fill it with content. So the repeated collection, each repeated item is accessible as current item. So we're repeating through all the team member records from our database. And as we work with this repeated component now, if we want to use the current one that it's of its loop, so record number 1, record number 2, record number 3, we can access that with current item. So let's go in here and see that at work. So here's the props that we defined on our teams component. And we need to specify for each of this iteration of repeated cards, what name, what position, what buyer, and what image URL should we use. So I'm going to click the dynamic value here, and I've got current item here, which is the current iteration, so the current team member in our loop of all the team member records. Okay, so name is this field here. You can see Callum, Harry, Hermione. So it's filling it with a dynamic value. You know, this first record is me, so it gives it Callum. The second record is Harry, so it gives it Harry, etc. I'm going to do the same for position, current item, and then bio as well. Cool. And then finally for the image URL, current item, image, image URL. Cool. So now we have our team member part of our page dynamic from data in our Knack database. So once again, we've got those 3 records in our Knack database, and that's showing now in a really nicely formatted way. So once again, if we reload our page, we should see that that is reflected. So this is our Knack app now that I'm reloading. And got our dynamic 75 clients. And we've got our actual team members from the database, which is really cool. Okay, so let's just double check that that's working by adding a new person to our list of team members in our Knack database. I'm going to go add record. I'm going to drag in some information that I have already copied on another screen. Okay, and now I'm going to create that new record. Cool, and now let's refresh our Knack page and make sure that Ron appears. And there he is. So you can see that the potential of that is huge, especially showing the dynamic kind of list of team members or whatever. So we could make a portal in a Knack database that doesn't have to look really fancy and let users update their own information. And then we can create a really nicely designed page that shows that information. There really is so many amazing possibilities once you can do things like this with your Knack data. So that's the end of the video. In summary, we've made a really nice landing page for a Knack app that pulls real data from our database, and we've done it all with just a tiny bit of code using mostly no-code tools, and it wasn't particularly hard to do. So let me know if you give it a try. Really keen to know how it works for you and if you manage to get it working and what possibilities you see for this. If you like this video, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you'll get notified about any future videos about Knack and cool things you can do with it. Thanks.